My dad forgot to hang up the phone. I heard every word. She's a burden. I didn't say a thing. Instead, I sold my $980,000 house, moved everything out, and disappeared. When they came back from their Europe trip, smiling and relaxed, the key didn't fit. The house was empty, and the note on the counter read, "Surprise." The burden did this. They say blood is thicker than water. But what happens when that thick blood tries to drown you in a sea of manipulation and greed? For me, it was the sound of my own father's voice, not knowing I was still on the line, that truly opened my eyes. What I heard changed everything. It was a confession that turned my sanctuary, the $980,000 house my grandmother left me, into a battleground. And that day, a burden did something they never saw coming. Before I dive into how it all went down, let me know where you're watching from in the comments, and if you've ever had to stand up for yourself against family who took you for granted, hit that like and subscribe button. Growing up, money was always tight. My parents, Robert and Diana, were constantly working multiple jobs just to keep a roof over our heads in our tiny rental and put food on the table. My dad, a factory worker, always seemed to carry this heavy chip on his shoulder, constantly grumbling about missed opportunities. My mom was always juggling part-time receptionist gigs. And despite all their struggles, which I saw every single day, they never, ever let me forget that every single dollar spent on me was a dollar they couldn't spend on themselves. It made me feel like an ongoing expense, a burden I hadn't asked to be. But then there was my grandmother, Elizabeth. She was different. Where my parents saw only limitations, Grandma Elizabeth saw potential in me. She was this incredible, savvy businesswoman who built her own real estate portfolio from scratch after my grandfather passed away young. Emma, she'd tell me during our weekend visits to her beautiful colonial home, her voice firm yet gentle, "Never let anyone tell you what you're worth. You decide that for yourself." Those weekends at Grandma's were my escape. Her house was spacious, filled with beautiful antiques and overflowing with warmth. The backyard garden, where we'd plant flowers together, became my sanctuary. Unlike the tension-filled air at my parents' home, Grandma's place felt like absolute freedom. When I turned 18, Grandma was right there, helping me apply for college scholarships and loans. My parents, on the other hand, saw higher education as putting on airs. They refused to contribute a dime. "College is for people who think they're better than everyone else," my father would scoff, though I later learned it was really because he'd never been accepted himself. So, I worked my butt off, 3 jobs all through college, and graduated with a business degree. I landed a position at a real estate firm right away. Grandma beamed with pride at my graduation. My parents? They just complained about the parking situation. Then came the day that changed everything. My wonderful Grandma Elizabeth passed away suddenly from a heart attack when I was 25. I was absolutely devastated. She'd been my champion, my safe place, my everything. At the reading of her will, everyone was shocked. Well, everyone except perhaps me, when her attorney announced she'd left her house to me, not my parents. The property at 1842, Magnolia Drive, valued at approximately $850,000, I leave to my granddaughter, Emma Davis, who has shown the determination and responsibility to appreciate its value. The lawyer read, and I watched my parents' faces just darken with fury. The will was crystal clear. The property was fully in my name, no conditions, no co-ownership. My parents were left a modest cash inheritance, which, predictably, they blew almost immediately on a new car and a bunch of electronics. From the moment the deed transferred to my name, my parents began referring to it as the family home rather than, Emma's house. What started as occasional comments like, "When we renovate the kitchen," gradually morphed into full renovation plans, drawn up without my input. All this while I paid every single bill, every tax payment, every repair cost. "We should really replace these countertops," my mother would sigh, running her hand across the granite I had just paid to install. "I don't like that paint color in the living room," my father would announce, completely disregarding that I had carefully selected it to match my new furniture. Despite my growing success as a realtor, I was now making a comfortable 6-figure income. My parents still treated me like a teenager playing house. When I tried to establish boundaries, their response was always the same: family doesn't have boundaries. But somehow, those lack of boundaries only ever worked in one direction. After about 3 years of this arrangement, my parents announced they were planning a 3-month European vacation, something they'd always dreamed of. What they didn't announce was how they intended to pay for it. "We can use the equity in the house," my father casually mentioned one Sunday dinner. "You mean my house?" I asked, trying so hard to keep my voice level. "The house that's only in my name." "Don't be selfish, Emma," my mother chimed in. "It's the family home. Your grandmother would have wanted us all to benefit from it." I refused to take out a home equity loan for their vacation. But I made the mistake of offering to help them with some of the expenses because I knew they couldn't afford it otherwise. Before I knew it, I was funding nearly the entire trip: flights, accommodations, spending money, all while they complained that the hotels I booked weren't centrally located enough. The day before they left for their grand European tour, I overheard my mother on the phone with her sister. "Of course Emma's paying. It's the least she can do considering we let her keep the house." Let me keep my own house? The house my grandmother specifically left to me? I should have recognized that red flag for what it was, but I still desperately wanted their approval. If only I had known what was truly coming, I might have changed the locks before they ever even left for Paris. It was a Tuesday afternoon in June when everything changed. My parents had been in Europe for about 6 weeks at that point, currently enjoying Paris according to their social media posts. I was home after showing properties all morning when I remembered that the kitchen sink had been leaking before they left. Since they were returning in just a few weeks, I decided to get it fixed. I needed to ask my father where he'd put the warranty information for the faucet he had installed last year, one of the few home improvements he had actually completed himself. I dialed his international number and waited through the series of clicks and beeps that signaled the overseas connection. "Hello." My father's voice sounded distant, the connection slightly delayed. "Hey, Dad. Quick question about the kitchen faucet warranty. Do you remember where you put the paperwork? It's starting to leak." He sighed heavily into the phone. "It's in the filing cabinet in the den, second drawer under kitchen." "Why can't this wait until we get back?" "Because water is currently damaging the cabinet beneath the sink," I explained, trying to keep the irritation from my voice. "I just need to call the company and see if it's covered." Fine, he muttered. "Your mother and I are about to go to dinner, some nice place near the Eiffel Tower." "Sounds great. How's Paris?" I asked, trying to be polite despite his attitude. "Expensive," he replied curtly. "Look, I've got to go. We'll talk later." "Okay, thanks for the information. Enjoy your dinner." I heard some rustling, then what sounded like my father putting the phone in his pocket. He hadn't hung up properly. I was about to end the call from my end when I heard his voice, now muffled, but still audible. "Who is that?" My mother's voice. "Just Emma, complaining about something in the house again." My father's voice was clearer now, as if he'd taken the phone out of his pocket, but still thought the call had ended. "What now?" My mother sounded annoyed. "Something about the kitchen sink. I swear all she does is find problems with that house." I should have hung up. I knew I should have hung up, but something kept my finger hovering over the end call button, unable to press it. "I don't understand why your mother left her that house in the first place," my mother continued. "We're her parents. It should have gone to us." "Well, once we're back, we need to have a serious conversation about our retirement," my father said. "Emma needs to understand that house is our security for the future." I felt my stomach drop. They were planning something. "She's been a burden from the start," my father continued, his voice hard and clear. "All those years of expenses, college, everything. Now she has this valuable property just dropped in her lap, and what? She thinks she deserves it? What has she ever done?" A burden. The word echoed in my head like a gunshot. "She's always been selfish," my mother agreed. "But she's also easily manipulated. Remember how quickly she agreed to pay for most of this trip? All I had to do was mention family obligation a few times. They laughed together, a synchronized sound I'd heard my whole life, but now it sounded sinister. "We just need to keep working on her," my father continued. "Eventually, she'll sign the house over to us, or at least add us to the deed. Her weakness is that she still wants our approval." I couldn't breathe. My hand was shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. I managed to fumble with my other cell phone and began recording the conversation. "What if she doesn't agree?" my mother asked. "She will," my father said confidently. "Emma's always been desperate for our approval. We just need to make her feel guilty enough. Remind her of all we've sacrificed. If that doesn't work, we start talking about nursing homes and medical expenses. Trust me, by this time next year, that house will be in our names. And if worst comes to worst," my mother added, "we're living there anyway. Possession is 9/10 of the law." She'd never evict her own parents. They both laughed again. I felt physically ill. "Speaking of which," my father continued, "when we get back, I think we should take the master bedroom. It's ridiculous that she has the largest room when she's hardly ever there because of work." "Good idea," my mother replied. "We should also talk about that vacation property she's been looking at. Complete waste of money. If she has extra cash to spend, she should be helping us more." "Exactly. Why should we struggle while she's building some real estate empire? She owes us." The conversation continued as they apparently walked to the restaurant, discussing various ways to manipulate me into giving them more money, more control, more of my life. I sat frozen in my chair, tears streaming down my face as every illusion I had about my family shattered around me. After about 15 minutes, the connection finally broke. I sat in complete silence, the phone still clutched in my hand. The house I had worked so hard to maintain. The house my grandmother had entrusted to me. The house I had opened to my parents out of love and obligation. They saw it as nothing more than their entitlement. And me? I was just a burden, a means to an end. Someone to be manipulated and used. In that moment, something broke inside me. But something else, something harder, colder, and more determined, took its place. I looked around at the home I had shared with them, seeing for the first time all the ways they had gradually asserted ownership. My father's recliner, positioned in the prime spot in the living room. My mother's decorative plates replacing my artwork. My own belongings gradually relegated to my area in what was supposedly my own home. I wiped my tears, took a deep breath, and made a decision. If I was such a burden, perhaps it was time to lift that weight from their shoulders permanently. I called in sick to work for the next 3 days. I couldn't face clients or colleagues with the storm raging inside me. Every time I replayed the conversation in my head, and I did, obsessively, I vacillated between crushing heartbreak and cold fury. How could the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally see me as nothing more than a resource to be drained? After the initial shock wore off, my realtor brain kicked in. I needed information, options, and a solid plan. No emotional decisions. My grandmother hadn't built her success by acting rashly, and neither would I. My first call was to Patricia Winters, a family law attorney I had worked with on several property transactions. I explained my situation, careful to stick to the facts. "The house is completely in my name," I concluded. "But they've been living there for almost 4 years. Do they have any legal claim to it?" Patricia was blunt and efficient, which was exactly what I needed. "Based on what you've described," she said, "absolutely not. There's no common law ownership that would apply here. You've maintained the property, paid all expenses, and most importantly, you have clear title. The fact that you allowed your parents to live there doesn't grant them any ownership rights." "What about the fact that they're my parents? Does that matter legally?" "Not in terms of property rights," she assured me. "You're an adult. You have no legal obligation to house your parents. The house is yours to sell, rent, or do whatever you please with." I felt a weight lift slightly. At least legally, I was on solid ground. "What about their belongings?" I asked. "That's a bit trickier," Patricia admitted. "Legally, you should provide reasonable notice and opportunity for them to collect their personal items. I'd recommend documenting everything carefully and perhaps putting their belongings in storage where they can access them." I took detailed notes, my mind already moving to the next step. Next, I contacted my colleague Marcus Wilson, one of the top-performing realtors in our firm, who specialized in quick, discreet sales for divorcing couples and estate liquidations. I need to sell my house quickly, quietly, and for as close to market value as possible, I told him when we met for coffee the next morning. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Running from the law, Emma?" The weak joke fell flat against my serious expression. Family situation, I said simply. I need this handled with absolute discretion. No public listings if possible, no signs in the yard, no open houses, and I need it done within 6 weeks. Marcus whistled low. That's aggressive, even in this market. You're looking at taking a hit on the price for that kind of timeline. I understand. What kind of hit are we talking about? We discussed numbers. My grandmother's house had appreciated significantly since I inherited it. Current market value was around $980,000, but for the expedited timeline and private sale, I might need to accept somewhere closer to $900,000. I can live with that, I said, calculating quickly. How soon can you start showing it? I have a few pre-qualified buyers looking for exactly this type of property in this neighborhood. I could have private showings set up by next week. Perfect. I'll need the house empty for showings. That afternoon, I created a detailed spreadsheet of all the items in the house, categorizing them meticulously. Items I had purchased, items my grandmother had left me, items my parents had brought when they moved in, items of questionable ownership. For the last category, I was ruthlessly honest. If I couldn't definitively prove something was mine, I put it in my parents' column. I wanted no legal or ethical gray areas that could come back to haunt me later. Next came the logistical planning. I needed a place to live temporarily, movers for my belongings, storage for my parents' possessions, new bank accounts at different institutions, a new phone number, a new email address, a plan for disappearing. I found a furnished short-term rental in a city about 2 hours away. I opened new accounts at a bank my parents had never used. I purchased a new phone with a new number. I created a new email address that couldn't be easily guessed. I meticulously gathered all my important documents, birth certificate, social security card, passport, insurance policies, investment accounts, and especially the deed to the house and my grandmother's will, and secured them in a safety deposit box at my new bank. As I worked through my checklist, I occasionally found myself hesitating. Was I overreacting? Then I'd replay the recorded conversation, hearing my father's contemptuous, "She's been a burden from the start," and my resolve would harden again. One afternoon, while sorting through a box of my grandmother's papers I'd kept, I found a letter she'd written to me, but apparently never sent. It was dated just a month before she died. "My dearest Emma," it began, "I want you to know why I've made the decisions I have about my estate. Your parents have always expected things to be handed to them. When they wanted to borrow money for various schemes over the years, I watched them squander every opportunity without learning or growing. But you, my sweet girl, you've worked for everything you have. You understand the value of both money and hard work. I'm leaving you my home because I know you'll honor it, care for it, and use it as a foundation to build your own success, not as a crutch to avoid responsibility. Never doubt that you deserve every good thing that comes to you. I'm so proud of the woman you've become." Tears streamed down my face as I read her words. It was as if she had somehow foreseen exactly what would happen and was reaching across time to strengthen my resolve. The next day, I contacted a moving company and scheduled them for the following week. I arranged for a storage unit in my parents' names, paid 6 months in advance, and made sure the information would be mailed to them. Every night, I updated my planning document, crossing off completed tasks and adding new details as they occurred to me. I was operating with cold efficiency during the day, but at night, alone in what had once been my sanctuary, I often broke down. One evening, as I was boxing up family photos, I came across one of me as a little girl sitting on my father's shoulders at a fair. We were both laughing, my small hands gripping his forehead, his hands securely holding my legs. I remembered that day, the cotton candy he'd bought me, the stuffed animal he'd won by knocking down milk bottles. For a moment, I almost called off the whole plan. But then I remembered his voice. "She's been a burden from the start." The photo went into the box labeled Parents' Items. By the end of the 3rd week, Marcus had brought through several potential buyers. 2 had made offers, both under asking, but within the range we had discussed. I accepted the higher one, $915,000 from a corporate executive relocating to the area who could close quickly. The pieces were falling into place. The sale would close in just over 2 weeks. My parents would return from Europe 3 days after that. Perfect timing. The morning of the closing, I woke up with a strange sense of calm. Over the past few weeks, I'd cycled through grief, rage, doubt, and determination. Today, I just felt focused. I dressed carefully in a crisp blue suit, professional, confident, the armor I needed for what would be one of the most significant days of my life. The closing was scheduled for 10 a.m. at the title company's office. I arrived at 9:45, carrying a slim portfolio containing the few remaining documents I needed. Marcus was already there, chatting with the title agent. He gave me an encouraging smile as I approached. "Ready for this?" he asked quietly. I nodded. More than ready. The buyers arrived precisely at 10 o'clock, Richard Thompson, the executive, and his wife Catherine. They seemed pleasant enough, excited about the house and the neighborhood. Under different circumstances, I might have shared stories about the property, the beautiful magnolia tree my grandmother had planted, the way the light hit the kitchen in the morning. Today, I just wanted to get through the paperwork. The process was surprisingly anticlimactic. Sign here, initial there, sign again. With each signature, I was simultaneously severing a tie and securing my freedom. When the title agent finally slid the check across the table, $915,000 minus the remaining mortgage and closing costs, I felt nothing but relief. "Congratulations," the agent said, shaking hands all around. "Best of luck to all of you." Outside in the parking lot, Marcus caught up with me. "You okay?" he asked, genuine concern in his eyes. "I will be," I said, managing a small smile. "Thank you for everything, Marcus. I couldn't have done this without you." "Happy to help," he replied. "Though I'm still curious about the story behind all this." "Maybe someday I'll tell you," I said. "But right now, I have movers to meet." The moving company arrived at exactly noon. I had already packed most of my personal belongings, clearly labeled and separated from my parents' things. I supervised as they loaded my furniture, boxes, and suitcases into their truck, bound for my new temporary apartment. My parents' belongings were handled with equal care, but with different destination tags. Everything was photographed, inventoried, and loaded into a separate truck, headed for the storage facility I'd rented in their names. I'd arranged for the access codes and payment information to be mailed to them at their current European hotel. As the movers worked, I walked through each room of the house, checking closets and drawers to ensure nothing was overlooked. In my parents' room, I found a small box hidden in the back of their closet. Curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it. Inside were letters, dozens of them, from my grandmother to my parents over the years. I shouldn't have read them, but I couldn't help myself. They detailed years of financial requests, manipulative tactics, and my grandmother's growing disillusionment with her son and daughter-in-law. "Robert," one letter began, "this is the last time I will provide financial assistance without a clear repayment plan. Your constant requests are straining our relationship, and I worry about the example you're setting for Emma." Another, dated just a year before her death, "I'm deeply concerned about your expectation that my home will someday be yours. I've worked hard for everything I have, and I intend to leave my assets to those who will respect and preserve them. I suggest you begin making your own retirement plans that don't involve my property." I carefully replaced the letters in the box and added it to the items for storage, but I felt a renewed connection to my grandmother and her decision to leave me the house. She had seen through my parents long before I had. By late afternoon, both trucks were loaded and gone. I stood in the empty house, my footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors. Without furniture, without photos, without the accumulated evidence of lives lived within these walls, it was just a structure again. Beautiful, valuable, but no longer mine. I walked through each room one final time. In the kitchen, where I'd baked cookies with my grandmother. In the living room, where we'd watched old movies together. In the garden where she'd taught me the names of flowers and how to nurture growing things. "I hope you understand," I whispered, not sure if I was addressing my grandmother or the house itself. Finally, I placed the note I'd written on the granite countertop in the kitchen where it would be impossible to miss. Surprise! A burden did this. I took one last look around, then walked out the front door, locking it behind me. I dropped the keys through the mail slot, got into my car, and drove away without looking back. As I merged onto the highway, heading toward my new temporary home, I felt something unexpected. Freedom. For perhaps the first time in my life, I was making a decision completely for myself, unburdened by familial obligation or the desperate need for approval. The burden had been lifted, not from my parents, but from me. My temporary apartment was nothing special. A furnished one-bedroom in a modern complex with amenities I'd probably never use. But it was mine. With no history, no expectations, and most importantly, no one telling me I didn't deserve to be there. The first few days passed in a blur of practical tasks. I unpacked the essentials, set up my new laptop with enhanced security measures, and contacted my office to let them know I was taking a 2-week vacation, effective immediately. I didn't provide details, just that I needed personal time. By the end of the first week, I had established a routine of sorts. Morning coffee on the small balcony overlooking a man-made pond. Afternoons spent researching potential places to relocate permanently. Evenings filled with takeout food and mindless television to quiet my thoughts. I checked my old email and voicemail exactly once a day, never responding. There was nothing from my parents yet. They were still enjoying the final days of their European adventure, completely unaware that their lives were about to change dramatically. My phone pinged with a text from an unknown number. My heart jumped before I realized it was just a delivery notification. Still, it made me aware of the constant state of tension I was living in, waiting for the inevitable explosion when my parents returned home. To distract myself, I reached out to Megan Lancaster, a college friend I'd lost touch with, largely because my parents had never approved of her wild lifestyle, which consisted mainly of dating occasionally and enjoying concerts. Emma Davis. "Is that really you?" she exclaimed when I called. "It's been, 3 years?" "Something like that," I admitted. "I've been preoccupied." "Let me guess. Still trying to please the unpleasable parents." Her directness made me laugh for what felt like the first time in weeks. "Actually, I'm calling because I finally stopped trying." We met for dinner that night at a restaurant halfway between our locations. Over pasta and wine, I told her everything: the inheritance, the overheard conversation, the house sale, my disappearing act. "Holy S******, Emma," she said when I finished. "That's simultaneously the most terrible and most badass thing I've ever heard." "I'm still not sure if I did the right thing," I admitted. "Are you kidding me? They were planning to manipulate you out of your house, a house your grandmother specifically left to you. They called you a burden while living in your home rent-free and having you pay for their European vacation. If anything, you are too nice with the whole storage unit arrangement." Her validation loosened something tight in my chest. Maybe I wasn't overreacting. Maybe this was the appropriate response to years of manipulation. The next day, I scheduled an appointment with a therapist. Dr. Sarah Palmer specialized in family trauma and had an opening the following week. It was time to address not just the recent betrayal, but the lifetime of conditional love that had preceded it. 10 days after the house closing, my old phone exploded with notifications, texts, voicemails, emails, all from my parents. They had returned from Europe and discovered the truth. The first voicemail: "Emma, what the hell is going on? We just got home and our key doesn't work. Call us immediately." My father's voice was more annoyed than concerned. The second, an hour later: "Emma Marie Davis. This is not funny. Where are you? Why is the house empty? Call us right now." Now he sounded angry. The third, from my mother: "Emma, sweetie, we're very worried about you. Please call us as soon as you get this. We just want to know you're safe." Her voice dripped with the manufactured concern she'd perfected over the years. The texts escalated similarly, from confusion to demands, to threats, to fake worry. The final voicemail, left at nearly midnight: "We found your note. I don't know what you think you heard, but you've made a terrible mistake. This is our home too. You had no right to sell it. We're consulting an attorney first thing tomorrow. You've really done it this time, Emma." I saved all the messages, but responded to none of them. Let them consult any attorney they wanted. The house had been mine to sell. True to their word, they showed up at my real estate office the next morning, causing exactly the scene I'd anticipated. My colleague, Jamie, texted me, "Your parents are here raising hell." Boss told them you're on vacation and showed them the door when they wouldn't leave. Everything okay? I responded with a simple, family drama. I'll explain when I get back. Thanks for the heads up. Later that day, my boss called directly. Emma, I don't know what's going on with your family, but they made some pretty serious accusations today. Something about you selling their house illegally. I took a deep breath. It wasn't their house. It was mine, left to me by my grandmother. I'd been letting them live there, but I recently discovered they were planning to manipulate me into signing it over to them. So, yes, I sold my house, which was fully within my legal rights. I'm sorry they brought this drama to the office. There was a pause before she responded. I see. Well, they've been banned from the premises. Take whatever time you need and let me know if there's anything we can do. Her simple acceptance was another weight lifted. I'd been worried about the professional fallout, but it seemed I had more support than I'd realized. Over the next few days, my parents tried every avenue they could think of to reach me. They contacted mutual acquaintances, distant relatives, even my college alumni association. Each attempt further justified my decision to cut ties. 2 weeks after their return, they somehow obtained my new email address, likely from a well-meaning but naive former neighbor, and sent a lengthy message laying out their version of events. According to them, I had misunderstood a private conversation, overreacted dramatically, and betrayed my family in the most hurtful way possible. They were willing to forgive me if I would make things right by using the proceeds from the house sale to buy a new property that we could all live in together. The audacity was almost impressive. Even now, they were still trying to manipulate me. I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded the email to Patricia, my attorney, who confirmed again that I had acted completely within my legal rights and advised me to continue maintaining distance. As the weeks passed, I gradually began rebuilding my life. I returned to work, threw myself into my real estate business, and continued weekly therapy sessions. I found a lovely condo to purchase in my new city, smaller than my grandmother's house, but completely mine in every way that mattered. One evening, as I was arranging books on my new shelves, I came across an old photo album I hadn't opened in years. Inside were pictures of family vacations, holiday gatherings, birthday celebrations, moments that had once seemed happy, but now felt hollow knowing what lay beneath the smiling facades. I closed the album and put it away in a closet. Perhaps someday I'd be ready to look at those memories again, but not yet. For now, I was focused on creating new memories, ones not tainted by manipulation and conditional love. The burden I'd carried all my life, the desperate need to earn my parents' approval, was finally lifted, and I was lighter than I'd ever been. I managed to avoid my parents for nearly 3 months. I changed my routines, shopped at different stores, and became hypervigilant about my surroundings. But I knew a confrontation was inevitable. What I didn't expect was how it would happen. Rachel Chin, my former neighbor, called me on a Tuesday afternoon. "Emma, I thought you should know. Your parents are back at the house." My heart raced. "What do you mean, at the house?" "It's not their house anymore." "I know that," Rachel said. "But they're parked outside right now, just sitting in their car, staring at it. The new owners are away on business, so I don't think they know yet. I just thought you might want to know." I thanked her and immediately called Richard Thompson, the new owner, to warn him. He was concerned, but grateful for the heads up and said he'd alert his security company. Later that evening, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Emma," it was my father's voice, tight with controlled anger. "We need to meet tomorrow. The coffee shop on Maple Street at 10 a.m. If you don't show up, we're going to your office again. And this time, we won't leave quietly." Before I could respond, he hung up. I called Patricia immediately. "They're threatening to make a scene at my workplace if I don't meet with them." "You don't have to meet them at all," she reminded me. "We could get a restraining order based on these threats." I considered this option, but ultimately decided against it. "No," I said. "I think I need to face them, but I want it on my terms, not theirs." The next morning, I arrived at the Daily Grind, a popular coffee shop downtown, at precisely 10:15 a.m., late enough to make a point, but not so late they'd leave. I'd chosen this location because it was public, always busy, and the owner was a client of mine who I knew would have my back if things got ugly. I spotted my parents immediately, sitting at a corner table. My mother's face was drawn, her normally perfectly styled hair looking somewhat neglected. My father's jaw was set in that familiar rigid line that had always signaled dangerous waters ahead. I approached their table calmly, dressed in my most professional outfit, another suit of armor. Robert. Diana, I greeted them, deliberately using their first names instead of Mom and Dad. My mother flinched. My father's face darkened further. "Sit down," he commanded. "I'm not here to take orders," I replied evenly. "I agreed to meet you because I thought it might be time to clear the air. But this conversation happens on equal terms, or not at all." I sat down across from them, placing my phone conspicuously on the table between us. "Is that really necessary?" my mother asked, gesturing to the phone. "Given our history, yes," I said. "I record all important business meetings now." "We're your parents, not a business meeting," my father snapped. "And yet you threatened my workplace if I didn't comply with your demands. That sounds more like extortion than parenting." My directness caught them off guard. They were used to me backing down, accommodating, seeking peace at any cost. "What you did was unforgivable," my father finally said. "You stole our home." "It was never your home," I replied. "It was my home, which I generously allowed you to live in, a fact you apparently considered a burden." My mother's eyes widened. "What are you talking about?" I pressed play on my phone, and their own voices filled the space between us. "She's been a burden from the start. All those years of expenses, college, everything. Now she has this valuable property just dropped in her lap, and what? She thinks she deserves it? What has she ever done?" I stopped the recording and looked up to find my mother pale and my father flushed with anger. "You recorded us privately?" "That's illegal," he sputtered. "Actually, it's not illegal to record a conversation that you're part of," which I was, since you called me and then failed to hang up properly. But that's beside the point. The point is that I finally heard what you really think of me. "You misunderstood," my mother interjected quickly. "We were tired, stressed about money, while on an expensive European vacation that I paid for," I interrupted. "Please don't insult my intelligence by lying to me again." "So, you sold the house out from under us?" my father demanded. "Left us homeless as some sort of revenge?" "I sold my house because I finally realized it would never truly be mine as long as you were in it. And you're not homeless. You have the money Grandma left you." "Oh, wait. You spent that on a new car instead of securing your own housing." My father leaned forward, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. "You know, we could see you for this. We lived there for years. We have rights?" "Actually, you don't," I replied calmly. "I consulted with an attorney before making any decisions. You had no legal claim to the property. You paid no rent, contributed to no expenses, and your names were nowhere on the deed. But please feel free to waste what money you have left on a lawsuit you can't win." My mother began to cry. Those familiar tears that had so often manipulated me into compliance. This time, I felt nothing but a detached sort of pity. "What do you want from us, Emma?" she asked through her tears. "An apology? Fine. We're sorry if you misinterpreted what you heard." "If I misinterpreted?" I repeated incredulously. "That's not an apology. That's another manipulation, and it's exactly why I made the decision I did." I took a deep breath, centering myself before continuing. "What I want is very simple. I want you to acknowledge what you did, not just the conversation I overheard, but the years of treating me like an investment that needed to pay dividends. I want you to understand that your behavior has consequences. And I want you to respect the boundaries I'm establishing now." "Which are what, exactly?" my father asked, his voice cold. "I will not be providing you with any financial support. Going forward, I will not be sharing my new address with you. I will communicate with you only when and if I choose to. If you come to my workplace again or harass me in any way, I will pursue legal action." "So that's it? After everything we've done for you, you're just cutting us off?" My mother's voice rose dramatically. "After everything you've done to me," I corrected her. "And yes, unless and until you can demonstrate genuine remorse and change, this is where we stand." My father stood up suddenly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You ungrateful little," my mother grabbed his arm. Several other patrons had turned to look at our table. He sat back down, seething. You think you're so much better than us now, with your real estate career and your fancy education? But let me tell you something. You wouldn't have any of it if we hadn't raised you. You're right, I said, surprising them both. I wouldn't be who I am today without you. Every manipulative comment, every conditional show of affection, every time you made me feel like I wasn't enough, it all taught me exactly what kind of person I didn't want to become. So, in a way, I should thank you. My mother's tears had stopped, replaced by a stunned expression. My father looked like he'd been slapped. I stood up, gathering my purse and phone. Your belongings are in a storage unit. I've paid for 6 months. The information was sent to your hotel in Paris, but I can text you the details again if you need them. That's it? That's all you have to say to us? My mother asked, her voice small. I paused, looking at them both, really looking at them perhaps for the first time. Not as the towering authority figures of my childhood or the manipulative forces of my adult life, but just as two deeply flawed people who had never learned how to love without conditions. I hope you find peace, I said finally. I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for that makes you treat the people who love you the way you do. But I won't be your collateral damage anymore. I walked away then, feeling dozens of eyes on my back, but standing straighter than I had in years. Outside, I took a deep breath of the crisp autumn air, feeling something unexpected wash over me. It wasn't anger. It wasn't pain. It wasn't even satisfaction. It was peace. 6 months after the confrontation at the coffee shop, I was fully settled into my new life. I'd purchased a charming townhouse in Richmond, about 2 hours from my former home, and had transferred to our firm's office there. The change of scenery had been exactly what I needed. Close enough to maintain important professional connections, but far enough to start fresh. My new home was distinctly mine in a way my grandmother's house had never quite managed to be. I decorated it entirely to my own taste, modern but comfortable, with splashes of color that brightened even the gloomiest days. No antiques, no family heirlooms, nothing that carried the weight of the past. Professionally, I was thriving. The fresh start had reinvigorated my passion for real estate, and I found myself particularly drawn to helping first-time home buyers navigate the complicated process. There was something deeply satisfying about guiding people through one of the most significant purchases of their lives, ensuring they understood every document, every commitment, every right they had. You explain things differently than other realtors, one young couple told me after closing on their first home. Like you really want us to understand, not just sign. Everyone deserves to know exactly what they're agreeing to, I replied, thinking of how differently my own story might have unfolded if I'd recognized the manipulation earlier. My therapy sessions with Dr. Palmer continued, though we'd reduced the frequency to twice a month. Our work had shifted from the immediate trauma of my parents' betrayal to the deeper patterns that had defined our relationship for decades. You mentioned something interesting last time, Dr. Palmer said during one session. You said you still sometimes feel guilty for overreacting to what your parents said. I'd like to explore that a bit more. I shifted uncomfortably in my seat. Sometimes I wonder if I should have confronted them first, given them a chance to explain before taking such drastic action. What do you think they would have said if you had? I considered this. They would have denied it, or said I misunderstood, or that they were just tired and stressed and didn't mean it. And would any of those explanations have changed the fundamental truth of what you heard? No, I admitted. It would have just given them the opportunity to manipulate me again. Dr. Palmer nodded. Emma, what you experienced with your parents is something we call financial abuse, using money and resources as tools of control and manipulation. It's particularly insidious because it's often disguised as family helping family or parents looking out for their child. The term financial abuse hit me like a physical blow. I'd never considered applying that label to my situation, but as soon as she said it, I recognized its truth. The way they planned to pressure you into signing over your home, the way they manipulated you into paying for their vacation, even the way they made you feel guilty about your grandmother leaving you the house. These are all forms of financial abuse, she continued. And like any form of abuse, the appropriate response is to protect yourself, which is exactly what you did. Something shifted inside me that day. A final piece of lingering guilt dissolved, replaced by clarity. After that session, I began researching financial abuse in earnest. I was startled to discover how common it was, particularly within families, and how few resources existed to help people recognize and address it. An idea began to form, one that grew stronger with each article I read and each personal story I encountered online. 2 weeks later, I approached my boss with a proposal. I want to create a workshop, I explained, something for first-time home buyers, especially women, about recognizing and preventing financial manipulation in major purchases. My boss, Vanessa Martinez, listened thoughtfully as I outlined my concept. This isn't just about real estate transactions, I concluded. It's about empowering people to make financial decisions without manipulation or pressure, whether from family members, partners, or even unethical professionals. I think it's brilliant, Vanessa said when I finished. And timely. We've all seen clients pressured into decisions they later regret. If we can position ourselves as the agency that truly educates and advocates for clients' financial autonomy, that's a powerful market differentiation. With her blessing, I began developing materials for the workshop. What started as a simple presentation quickly evolved into a comprehensive program, covering topics from recognizing subtle manipulation tactics to establishing healthy financial boundaries. I called it Building Foundations, Financial Autonomy in Major Life Decisions. We offered the first workshop on a Saturday morning, expecting perhaps a dozen attendees. Over 30 people showed up. The response was overwhelming. People shared stories of parents who had pressured them into inappropriate investments, partners who had undermined their financial confidence, friends who had manipulated them into inappropriate loans. Each story resonated with my own experience, reinforcing my conviction that this work was needed. After the third successful workshop, a local women's magazine asked to interview me about the program. The article, titled Financial Freedom, Emma Davis's Mission to End Financial Manipulation, brought even more attention to the issue. It was through this growing network that I reconnected with my grandmother's sister, Aunt Judith, whom I hadn't seen since the funeral. She reached out after reading the magazine article. "Emma, your grandmother would be so proud of what you're doing," she told me over lunch. "Elizabeth faced similar struggles with your father throughout his life. He always expected things to be handed to him, just as his father had before him." I had no idea, I admitted. Grandma never really talked about that. She was private about family matters, Aunt Judith said. But she saw so much of herself in you, the independence, the work ethic. It's why she left you the house instead of Robert. She knew you'd use it as a foundation, not a crutch. Her words echoed the letter I'd found while packing, confirming what I'd already begun to suspect. My grandmother had made her decision with clear eyes and full awareness of its implications. "Have you had any contact with your parents recently?" Aunt Judith asked carefully. "Not since our confrontation," I replied. "I've received a few emails, but nothing that suggests they've really reflected on their behavior or taken responsibility for it." She nodded sadly. "Robert has always struggled with accountability, even as a child. Nothing was ever his fault." "I'm sorry, Emma. You deserved better parents." "I'm making peace with it," I said, surprised to find that it was true. I can't change who they are or how they treated me, but I can use that experience to help others and to build a better life for myself. On the 1-year anniversary of selling my grandmother's house, I took the day off work and drove to the cemetery where she was buried. I brought a bouquet of her favorite flowers, pink peonies, and sat beside her headstone. "I think I finally understand what you were trying to teach me," I said softly. "About self-worth and standing on my own, about recognizing when love comes with too many conditions. I wish we'd had more time together, but I'm grateful for every lesson you shared." As I sat there, I reflected on how much had changed in a year. The initial pain and betrayal had gradually transformed into something else. Not forgiveness exactly, but acceptance. My parents were who they were. Their behavior reflected their limitations, not my worth. The true burden I'd carried wasn't being their daughter. It was the exhausting effort of trying to earn love that should have been freely given. In setting those expectations aside, I'd found a freedom I never knew was possible. My phone buzzed with a text from Megan. "Still on for dinner tonight? The whole gang's excited to see you." I smiled as I replied in the affirmative. The gang was a group of friends I'd reconnected with or made new in the past year. People who accepted me as I was, who gave without keeping score, who supported without controlling. This was what real relationships felt like. This was what I deserved all along. As I drove home, I thought about the note I'd left in the empty house. Surprise! A burden did this. At the time, I'd meant it as a bitter reclamation of the word my father had used to wound me. Now, a year later, I saw it differently. Sometimes the heaviest burdens we carry are the expectations we place on ourselves to be perfect enough, accommodating enough, successful enough to finally earn the love that should be our birthright. Laying down that burden was the most liberating act of my life. That evening, surrounded by friends who had become my chosen family, I raised a glass in a private toast to my grandmother, to my journey, and to the woman I was still becoming, unburdened, uncompromised, and finally, truly free. Have you ever had to make a difficult decision to protect yourself from people who were supposed to love you? Sometimes the hardest boundaries to set are with family. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if my story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to prioritize their own well-being. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, you deserve relationships that lift you up, not weigh you down.